What's up, guys? If you're on this channel, then you're probably at least somewhat familiar with the idea that we believe William Shakespeare writing the plays attributed to him is a bit unrealistic based on what we know about him, and that there are a few other guys with better credentials than him, but that the most likely candidate is Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. If you're not yet familiar, well, I just gave you a synopsis. In this video, I'm first going to explain why it makes way more sense for the 17th Earl of Oxford, or just Oxford as we'll call him from now on for brevity, to have written the plays. After that, I'm going to have some fun and debunk the most common things that Stratfordians, or those who believe it's obvious Shakespeare wrote the plays and everyone who believes otherwise is a conspiracy theorist, say to try and disprove Oxford as the true author. Let's go! To start, the entire question about the real authorship of the works exists because the standard narrative makes some far-fetched conclusions that just don't seem realistic. The main question that we need to ask ourselves as critical thinkers is, how was a guy who never left England capable of writing many plays about foreign lands? In addition, if Shakespeare was a commoner himself, why was his material generally so degrading to commoners and so focused in on the nobility? These are critical questions that should be pondered by critical thinkers, alongside the puzzling fact that Shakespeare the person has a lot of holes in his life story which you wouldn't expect of the most acclaimed playwright in history. Oxford's resume is a bit more apt for what you would expect of such an esteemed individual. One of the main things that we as Oxfordians question is how a guy who never left England wrote many plays about Italy with details so accurate that only someone who'd been to the country could have written them. There are several plays set in Italy, but the one most often brought up as requiring intimate knowledge of the country is The Merchant of Venice. Written sometime in the late 1590s, this play takes place at a fancy estate in Venice. Shylock is a Jewish moneylender who lends Antonio, the merchant, 3,000 ducats, about $500,000, with the ridiculous default penalty that Shylock can take a pound of Antonio's flesh. Antonio's convinced he'll be able to repay the money when his ships come in, but that doesn't happen as they get lost at sea. Therefore, Shylock demands his money, and he won't even take twice as much from Antonio's friend Bassanio. The reason it's so questionable that someone who'd never been to Italy wrote them is that the play entirely evolves around the Venetian legal system. Among the Venetian concepts that the writer of the play needs to know were their currency, the ducat, and what the punishment is for a non-citizen doing attempted murder. These are some very specific topics that cast doubt on the prospects of a sedentary foreigner having written the play. Of course, arguably the most famous of the plays was Hamlet, and likewise it has a lot of connection to Oxford's life. This is a major difference between Stratfordians and Oxfordians. Stratfordians are like, this is just a fun tale of fiction, but Oxfordians are like, this is an autobiography. I can personally attest to how Hamlet made me feel the first time I watched it. The entire play is about Hamlet getting revenge on his uncle for killing his father, marrying his mother, and thereby becoming king. The play really speaks to anyone who hates their stepfather. Hell, it even makes me angry at my stepfather, even though I don't have one. That's the kind of emotion it evokes. And you know who had issues with his stepfather? Oxford. Oxford's father, the 16th Earl of Oxford, died unexpectedly in 1562 at age 46 under suspicious circumstances, after which his mother remarried some insignificant dude named Sir Charles Tyrrell, who Oxford wasn't a big fan of. In fact, the death of his father uprooted Oxford's life, and at age 12 he became a ward of the state and was moved away from his mother and into the house of the Queen's principal minister, Sir William Cecil. Oxford certainly accused his stepfather of murdering his father in Hamlet, where Hamlet's dad, also named Hamlet, dies of poison being poured into his ear, a fact which is revealed at the beginning when Hamlet's dad's ghost tells Hamlet and asks for vengeance, so yeah, Oxford wanted revenge on his stepfather for sure. Alright, now it's the good part where we debunk Stratfordian talking points. We'll start with a bit of a straw man, an argument that they attribute to us that isn't actually ours. The idea that we believe Shakespeare didn't exist. That's not the idea at all. We Oxfordians fully believe that William Shakespeare existed as a person under some spelling. We just doubt that he could have written the works commonly attributed to him. People often frame this as a comparison with Homer, a much more ancient author who some people actually think didn't exist, but it's not actually true. They're really just lying about Oxfordians. Next up, Stratfordians will often say that Shakespeare didn't need to have an intense education to write his works because he was simply a genius. Now, I'm never going to deny that uneducated people can go very far with their lives. This especially applies to a good number of CEOs these days. No, the issue here is with nature versus nurture. People may be born with a knack for playing certain instruments, for example, whether genetic or random chance. The thing is, they will still have to learn how to play that instrument. If they don't learn the instrument, it doesn't matter if they're genetically a genius player of that instrument, they won't be able to because no one ever taught them how to keys work or how to blow or strum it. Likewise, it doesn't matter if Shakespeare was an absolute chat at writing. If he didn't receive instruction on it, he wouldn't have been able to write the plays. We need someone who is both a boss at writing and educated on the topic. Along similar lines, Stratfordians often accuse Oxfordians of being elitist by making the above point, accusing us of trying to hijack something amazing that a commoner achieved and crediting it to the elites. This idea is modern and anachronistic. These days, it's completely conceivable that a Shakespeare-type rags-to-riches story could happen due to the high social mobility and mandatory education of the modern world. But back then, mid-level education was only for the elites. Shakespeare got it most in elementary school education, so we're not elitist for saying he wouldn't have had the training necessary to write what people credit him with. This was simply the reality of the time. I bet Shakespeare's mom drove him to elementary school in the family Subaru as well. More on the note of historical inaccuracies, that's exactly what the idea that Shakespeare wrote the plays is. Stratfordians often call Oxfordians conspiracy theorists for denying evident history and whatnot. But historical inaccuracies are everywhere in the field, and we'll easily just accuse them back of a malicious cover-up. Something many of y'all probably know is untrue by this point is the idea that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. This is everywhere by this point. The light bulb was actually invented by an English scientist named Sir Joseph Swan in early 1879, although there were other scientists and impractical prototypes before then. Edison was just a businessman and his patent came in late 1879. What a coincidence! On the other hand, a historical myth that less people are aware is wrong is the idea that the cesarean section was named after Julius Caesar because he was born by it and that his mom died as a result. First off, Caesar's mom Aurelia died in 54 BC when Julius was 46 and she was about 66, so very much not during childbirth. Also, the C-section isn't named after him. That faulty idea started later. It was actually named for a Roman law mandating its operation on deceased pregnant mothers known as the Lex Caesarea, or imperial law, which predates Julius Caesar by 600 years. The idea here is, don't act like something, especially from that long ago, is completely 100% true, within reason. Finally, Stratfordians often say that Oxford couldn't have possibly written some of the plays because he died before some of them were published. Basically, they're acting like posthumous publishing isn't a thing, which it very much is, and that we have certainty over the dates. Some of the plays may have been published at different times than they're commonly attributed to have been, but more importantly, published is not the same as written. Assuming the dates on all the supposedly post-1604 plays are correct, it's very conceivable that they were left on his shelf when Oxford died and then discovered later by his family or friends and published. That's how posthumous publishing works, and therefore, it's not necessarily required that the author of the works live past 1614. So clearly this was just a brief introduction with a lot of simplicity to why Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, wrote the plays and other works commonly attributed to William Shakespeare, but do you want to learn more? A great place to start would be the holy grail of investigative literature, Shakespeare Identified by J. Thomas Looney, which goes into much greater detail about all of this. Also, check out ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org for more recent details and personal stories from Oxfordians about how they arrived at this conclusion. Thanks for watching!